The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Welcome wherever you are. Looking forward to giving you a little lowdown on what the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams are. Comes from my research and the book that I'm now in the process of getting published, as you can see on your screen there. And you'll have an opportunity later, if you'd like to pre-order that book, you can do that through here. But what I want to do now is talk a little bit about what's in the book, and in particular these 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. You might say, well, why is there 8? Look, there's possibly more. I don't think there's less, and I think many of you would see these as fairly obvious, but nevertheless, I want to share the model with you and perhaps talk a little bit about what you can do in your teams, particularly in the environment that we're in now, in order to really give it a kick along to some of those particular characteristics. All right, so there's 3 things that basically I'm trying to cover during our short time together. I want to obviously talk about the 8 characteristics, and I'll share with you a new model that will be part of my book. I want to talk about some of the tools and ways that you might be able to enact some of those characteristics more effectively. And of course, I've got a special offer for you in relation to my new book. So, and at any time during the broadcast, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, then if you go to the right-hand side, you'll see a question box there. And if you just open that up and type in your question, I'm the only one that gets to see it. And of course, I'll respond to it the moment I do see it when I can draw breath. So please, I'd be more than happy to hear your questions and comments and observations in relation to this very interesting topic. Now, I think if you look at high-performing teams and the work that I've done in this area, it seems to me that it's not the tasks that separate a high-performing team. So when I say tasks, what I'm referring to there is the capability of the team. So you can find teams that have got very high levels of capability, regardless of what they are, that wouldn't really be classified as high-performing teams. So it's not the tasks that make all the difference. Obviously, having a high capability is important, but nevertheless, what does separate high-performing teams from mediocre or poor-performing teams is the relationship aspect of teams. That is how the teams get on with each other, how the team members get on with each other, how the team leader interacts with their team members, and how the team members themselves interact with each other, not to mention the fact that they also have interaction with their stakeholders within and outside the organisation. So it's the relationship aspect that's the critically important component or dimension, if you like, of teams that are high performing. So when you think about the concept of high-performing teams and the concept of the people dimension that I talked about, you can conceptualize it this way. You'll notice that on your screen, you've got the needs of a team, which of course are the tasks. All teams are put together to create a service or produce a product or whatever, and of course that's the task dimension. But within the relationship dimension, you've got 2 individual aspects from a team leader point of view. You've got your relationship with the team as a whole, which is normally something that's done in team meetings, which in most cases now are done virtually. And then you've got your individual one-on-one interactions with your team members. So the task is very much what you do, and the individual is catering for those individual needs. And of course, we know that everyone's got different motivations, different levels of drive, different levels of competency. All of these things have to be catered for. So dealing with individuals one-on-one, of course, is critically important. But the other side of it, of course, is that is to maintain the harmony within the team, which is often the more elusive aspect of teamwork. How do you keep the team cohesive? How do you create a team identity? How do you balance collaboration with making decisions unilaterally? All of that becomes quite tricky as a team leader, which I'm sure you'd accept. So it's not an easy dimension, but nevertheless, it is the differentiator, as I said, between high-performing and low-performing teams. So I'm not suggesting we should neglect the task aspect of what teams do. Obviously, it's important. The team wouldn't be there if it didn't have a task to do. But I can say to you that if you're seriously looking at developing a high-performing team, it's about the relational elements of teamwork that make all the difference. Now, what I'm sharing with you on the screen now is my model of the high-performing teams. I call this a team identity model, and I'm going to spend a bit of time running through that with you so that I can give you a little bit of a heads up as to how this model works. And as I talk about some of these characteristics, I'll obviously give you some heads up on how you might actually improve those. Now, the first thing about the model is that all of these aspects are interrelated. So the good news for you is that if you work on one of these characteristics, it's likely to benefit other characteristics in the model. So in other words, just by putting an effort into, say, building trust, it's likely to help with, say, things like shared leadership. On the other hand, the bad news is if one of these characteristics are not actually evident in your team, it's likely that's going to impact on other characteristics in your team as well. So the point is that this is all interrelated. Now, in the middle circle, of course, I call this team identity, and around the in the inner circle there, you've got three key elements of team identity. I call these buffering, bridging, and building. And I'm going to explain what they mean shortly because they are critical to developing a good team identity. And I'll define what I mean by a good team identity shortly. And then around the outside, you've got the 8 characteristics that I'm going to refer to as well in the model. But you'll notice the characteristics are clustered around each of the 3 elements of team identity. So in other words, it is a subset of the key element of team identity. So I'm going to refer to those in a bit more detail very shortly. But what I want to say to start with is let's just try and define what we mean by team identity. And I've got a couple of definitions here that might assist you, because I think when we think about team identity, often what happens is that we might think it's about cohesion. It's not necessarily about cohesion, but team identity actually refers to the extent to which a team member actually identifies with the team. So, for example, your team is no doubt part of a larger organisation. And if you've got a very strong and healthy team identity in your team, it's likely that people will probably refer to the team and what the team does before they mention the organisation at large. So it's where the person actually identifies, where they identify and where they think they reside in the team. So a stronger team's identity, the more its members actually connect with the team ethos. Now, of course, you can overdo this, because if you have too strong a team identity, then people see themselves as part of the team only and not part of the overall organisation. So it's critically important that the team identity is strong, but not so strong as it neglects its stakeholders internal to the business and outside as well. So that's important. But a compelling team identity results in its members readily identifying with the team before the organisation at large, as I mentioned. So that's my definition of team identity. So it's quite possible that a team may not have a huge degree of cohesion and still have a strong team identity, although it would be rather unusual for that to be the case. Likewise, a team could have a very good cohesion, but not necessarily a distinct team identity, although again, that they do in some senses indirectly relate to each other. All right, so let's go back to the model and let's talk about the model itself and each of these aspects. So let's start with buffering. Now, buffering is an element of team identity, and buffering by its nature is about the team protecting itself from unnecessary outside influences. Now, I'm not talking about putting a brick wall up and then stopping anything getting into the team, but of course team members are called upon to attend mindless meetings. Team members are called upon to do extra work beyond what the core activities of the team are. There's a whole range of distractions and factors that will impact on the team's ability to actually get their job done. Excuse me. So obviously you can overdo buffering to a point where you completely restrict anything from outside the team for impact on the team, and that wouldn't be a good thing. And there are three particular characteristics that relate to buffering. One is building trust. Now, if team members have a high degree of trust between each other, that is between you and your team leaders and also the team leaders themselves, if you could classify a high degree of trust or categorize your team as having a high level of trust, then it's likely that people won't be able to play one team member off on another, which is often the case. So, you know, rifts and factions within teams are less likely to form because the team has a very strong level of trust within the team. And trust is one of those elusive aspects where it takes a while to build it and it doesn't take long to lose it. So it's one of those characteristics that need to be continually attended to, because if it's not attended to, it's likely that it'll suffer in some respects, but it does, of course, help protect the team from outside forces. Now, shared leadership, not all decisions, of course, are shared leadership where you would sit down with your team and decide how to do things, but certainly there is a need, or we do know that in high-performing teams, the leadership baton is shared amongst team members so that we can build upon people's capabilities and different points of view and so forth. So I would urge you, for example, in your team meetings, particularly if they're done online now, is to spend 50% on reporting, which of course is essential for a work in progress meeting. But I would also spend 50% on discussion. That is a free-flowing discussion where all team members are invited to contribute to some issue that you want to discuss. You have to work out, of course, what those issues are. Now, if a team can actually share its leadership, then it also protects it from outside forces. So in other words, people will take a little bit more ownership of the total team output, and what that'll mean is that there's less likelihood that the team will be sabotaged from outside influences. And the third element of buffering is the concept of agility or being agile. Now, I know that's a buzzword. What do we actually mean by that? It's a team that can be able to maneuver and flex and change course and direction very quickly. And of course, a lot of teams like to think that they're agile, but in reality, they're not really. And it's important that you try to identify, you try to develop that agility in the team, because the fact of the matter is, as we now know from COVID-19, that the world is changing quite rapidly. There are things that are occurring in the outside surroundings or environment that are impacting on the team on a daily basis. And so a team needs to be able to be flexible. Now, if you're working in a large government department, and some of you are, then that becomes difficult because the government department itself may have rules, regulations and procedures, rightly so, for the way things are done. And so if you're a leader in a team in those sorts of organisations, it's very much a challenge for you to retain your agility. But as we have seen through the crisis that we're in at the moment, that people are perhaps more agile than they perhaps believed they could be. And so the potential is always there for us to be agile. So it is quite possible for that to occur. So moving on to the second, I've lost my slide, come back. So moving on to the second element of team identity is bridging. Now, bridging is the exact opposite of buffering, whereas buffering is preventing distractive forces from interfering and sabotaging the team's core objective. Bridging is the exact opposite. That is reaching out to the key stakeholders that are required in order for the team to achieve its task or core purpose. So bridging and buffering working in tandem are really important. This is about building good stakeholder alliances, and so forth is really, really important, because obviously a team isn't working in isolation. They have lots of factors. They have lots of individuals that they need to call upon in order for the team to be high performing. So one of the key characteristics is for the team to develop a clear purpose of what they're there for. Now, one of the things you might like to do in one of your team meetings, for example, in that 50% of discussion, is actually to ask your team members, what is our core purpose? And just kind of go around the virtual room, if it's done virtually, and ask people to identify what they believe to be the core purpose of the team. And you might be surprised, and perhaps even unpleasantly surprised, that your team have got a completely different perspective, or team members have got different perspectives. So it's very important for you to identify what that is. So in theory, at least, everything that's said, done, and thought about in a team needs to be either directly or indirectly related to the purpose of the team. So what we need to identify is what the core purpose of the team is. And that needs to be able to be articulated in one simple sentence. And so one of the things you could work on to build a high team identity is to identify what is our core purpose. Why do we exist? What is the value that we provide? Now, it may not just be the tasks that you do. So, for example, I've got a client who is in charge of his IT department. And I asked him the other day, I said, what's your core purpose? And he said, our core purpose is to assist other business units to be able to perform more efficiently and effectively. You see, so obviously there are a series of things that IT does in order for that to happen, but the core purpose is for that team to help the rest of the organisation, them being a service provider, to be more efficient and effective. So you might want to think, well, what is our team identity? It's certainly worthwhile having a discussion about that. Also, you could be very clear what the team identity, you could be very clear about what the purpose of the team is, but the question is everybody else as clear as you are, and are you right? So it's worth a discussion. Now, the second characteristic, and there are only two for bridging, but albeit important, is that it's really important for a high-performing team to be able to manage its stakeholders. That is extremely important, because without your stakeholders, obviously, you get nothing done. And stakeholders, of course, have different agendas. They have different tasks to do, hence the need for them to be in their own team. So managing stakeholders is critically important. And one of the things I suggest you might like to try to do is to do a stakeholder mapping exercise with your team. And what that means is get a whiteboard out, or do this. You can do these things virtually, and almost like a mind map, and say, okay, who are all our key stakeholders in the team? For the team, and get people to list those down and to actually create this map of who the stakeholders are, and then get your team to rate them on a scale of 5 to 1. 5 is high, 1 is low in terms of their importance to the team's effectiveness and efficiency. So, for example, your stakeholders who might be 5, and I can give you an example of that. It might be your boss, for example. Your boss, who isn't actually a member of the team, is nevertheless a very important stakeholder to your team's success. So you would rate them a 5. So the question then is, once we've rated them, what can we do to build better working relationships up with our stakeholders so that they're more responsive to our needs and interests? So that then leads to the element of bridging, which of course is the second element in the model. Now, the third element in the model is building. Now, building is an internal function. Bridging is an internal and external function. Bridging, of course, is an external function, and building is an internal function. So in building, what we're attempting to do there is to build a culture that is effective for the team's success. So how do we go about building a good culture in our team? All teams have a culture. The question that really arises is that culture actually assisting the team, or is it actually getting in the way of the team? So again, it's worth talking to your team. One of the great activities you could do is to ask your team members, if you had to describe our team as a colour, what colour would it be and why? If you had to describe our team as an animal, what animal would it be and why? And if you had to describe our team as a motor vehicle, what motor vehicle would it be and why? You'll find this is a very interesting exercise, because the colour, the animal and the vehicle are metaphors for what people think about their own culture, that is the team's culture. And you'll hear common themes running through the team members, so that could be another interesting exercise for you to do. But there are three key characteristics that really do contribute to building a very unique and productive team culture. The first one listed there on the chart on the model is improving systems. Now, most of us don't bother to improve our internal systems. Now, of course, we've got external systems imposed upon us from outside. Now, there's nothing you can do about that. That's just part of being part of an organisation. But you also have your unique systems within your team, the way you do things, the way you run your meetings, the way you communicate with each other. All of these things are open to be discussed and improved. So the place to start with that is actually to start with the things where the systems are very dominant. A good place to start is in your team meetings. How can we make these teams meetings more efficient and effective? Might be a good starting point. That would be a systems improvement if you implemented those changes. So all good teams are always trying to improve and hone the systems that they operate within. So that becomes critically important. Now, we hear a lot about diversity, and it is very important, and there is now research to demonstrate that diversity does make a big difference. And if it's being utilised, we do know that there's a correlation now from research between utilising and harnessing diversity or not and the end result, that is the productivity of the team. Now, of course, you may be thinking, well, I've already got a team organised, so how can I really do anything about that? Diversity means more than gender. Diversity means more than age. Diversity means more than experience. I'd like you to think about diversity also around thinking styles. Everyone has their own way of looking at things. So, for example, you've got big picture operators and you've got detailed operators. You've got people who are extrovert and you've got people who are introvert. You've got thinkers versus doers. These are elements of diversity that need to be considered and utilised in order for your team to become high performing. So it's interesting that we do call people out on prejudice around diversity, on those things that are very obvious, but we don't seem to do this when it comes to the way people think. So I think the next big area of diversity will be making sure that people don't discriminate against people on the basis of how they think about, you know, what their mindset is and how they come to a problem or a solution. So it's important to exercise the way people think. Now, if you do that, it's likely to be quite useful and effective for you in terms of building the team or building a team culture. And the third element, or the third characteristic of building, is learning continuously. All high-performing teams, in my experience, are teams that learn from their mistakes. They accept the mistakes because we all make them. We're human beings. We accept them and we learn from them. So one of the most powerful tools that you can use for that is what the military use, which is an after-action review. So at the conclusion of a project, instead of just moving on to the next one, actually stop for a moment and actually work with your team collectively, share the leadership, and talk to the team. And basically an after-action review is based on three key questions. What went well? No matter whether it was a disaster or not, there's always something that was done well in any project. what didn't go well, even if it was the most perfect outcome, there's always something that could be improved. Then once you've exhausted those two questions, the next question is, what will we do differently next time? What will we do differently next time when we're faced with the same sort of circumstance, the same project? And that exercise itself is very, very powerful, because you are vesting the interests of the team in that debriefing exercise. And of course, the next step is to make sure you follow through. You don't want to make your after action review too bureaucratic. It really is a process of recording it, yes, because you want to refer to it later. But at the end of the day, it's a process of learning continuously, not a box ticking exercise. So folks, that's my 8 characteristics, and those are the 3 elements of team identity. Now, as I said before, people often say to me, well, where do you start? Well, you start anywhere you like. And the good news, as I said from the outset, is that if you work on one of those 8 characteristics, it's likely that once you have, built those characteristics up, they will impact on the other characteristics either directly or indirectly as such. So if you've got any questions, any comments, any observations, now would be the time to ask. I have a measurement tool designed to be able to, measure a team in terms of these 8 characteristics around the outside, and I'd be happy to talk to you offline about that if you're interested. Now, what I want to do now is just finish up by if I may, give you an offer that I think is a great offer, and that is that my book, of course, is not published yet, but it will be at some stage. I'm pretty sure it'll be published this year, but with the arrangements the way we are in the world, nothing, I guess, is guaranteed, but it's certainly going to be published. And my offer to you is that if you pre-order my book, which is called Winning Teams, applying the All Blacks formula to your team, if you order that, I would invoice you for $30 plus postage. And in return for that, of course, you'd receive a copy signed by me as soon as the book comes out. But in return for that, you'll receive an online course on building highly effective teams. Now, in this online course, I go through in more detail some of the strategies and tools that I've called upon today. And I value that at $675 if I was charging that out to someone. But for you, by pre-ordering the book, I will give you a key, and you can go into that and you can work your way through your team identity model, and you can start to apply some of the really important characteristics that I've talked about today. In order to take advantage of that offer, I would ask you to send me an email at tim@winnersatwork.com.au by the close of business today, and I'd be more than happy to organise that for you, and I'll send out the details for how you can access that. You can access it straight away. So folks, that's it from me. So thank you for joining me. You'll receive an email from me very shortly, and in that email you'll get a copy of the recording, and you'll also get a copy of the slides, and I'll probably reiterate the offer that I've just talked about today as well. But don't hesitate, get in early. Close of business today will be the time limit that I'll put on that. So thanks everyone, thanks for your involvement. I've just got a question or a comment here. Okay, thanks Lisa, that's very kind of you, thank you. Thank you everyone. I look forward to hearing from you, and wish you a great weekend, probably at home, no doubt, but never mind, we'll get through this at some stage, and I think there's a little glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. So stay positive, bring your best self to work, and have a wonderful weekend. And I just want to thank everyone very much, and all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you, and goodbye.